For over 100 years, a group of foreign rulers called the Hyksos controlled ancient Egypt. And the story we've been told is one of brutal, violent conquest. But what if that story, the one that's been passed down for thousands of years, is just plain wrong? All right, let's get into it and see if we can peel back the layers of this ancient myth.
So this is the story that stuck. It comes from an Egyptian historian named Manetho, but get this, he was writing almost 1,300 years after the Hyksos were gone. He paints this absolutely terrifying picture, right? A sudden, brutal invasion by some mysterious horde that just burned everything to the ground. And for centuries, this was the story everyone believed, no questions asked.
Yeah, Manetho's account is super dramatic. But here's the thing about history. It's almost always written by someone, usually long after the fact. So what happens when we push that dramatic story to the side for a minute and actually look at the physical evidence? I mean, what are the bones, the pottery, the ruins themselves? What do they tell us?
Okay, so our first big clue that something isn't quite right with the whole invasion story, well, it's hidden in plain sight. It's in the name itself. Let's start right there and unpack what Hyksos even means.
So the word Hyksos actually comes from this Egyptian phrase, hekau-kasut. And this is a huge piece of the puzzle, because it turns out Hyksos wasn't a name for a whole people like the Romans or the Greeks. No, it was a job title, an official title that just means rulers of foreign lands. I mean, think about that for a second. The Egyptians weren't talking about some invading horde. They were just referring to the guys in charge.
And right here, you can see exactly how the Egyptians wrote it. Look at that shepherd's crook on the left. That's the hieroglyph for ruler, Heka. And then next to it, you've got those three hills, which means foreign country, or kaset. Put them together, and what do you get? Ruler of foreign lands. But here's the really incredible part. This wasn't a new term they invented for these guys. Egyptian records show they were using this exact title for chieftains from Asia for centuries before the Hyksos ever came to power.
So you might be thinking, wait, I thought they were called shepherd kings. And yeah, a lot of people did. But that actually comes from a mistranslation that got popular way, way later, thanks to the historian Josephus. He probably just misunderstood how the word was pronounced in his time. The real story is, well, a lot less romantic, but a whole lot more accurate. It was just a political title, plain and simple.
All right, so the name itself is a pretty big clue, but what happens when we stop looking at words and start, actually digging in the dirt? Let's turn to the hard, archaeological evidence, because this is where the old story really starts to fall apart.
I mean, just look at this incredible painting. This is from a tomb that's more than 200 years older than the supposed Hyksos invasion. What you're seeing is a peaceful group of people from Asia just arriving in Egypt. And their leader, this guy named Abisha, he's given a title in the hieroglyphs right there. Any guesses what it is? Yep, Hyksos. They were calling him a Hyksos. This is solid proof, right here, that the term was used for peaceful foreigners long before it ever got linked to an invasion.
And now we get to what might be the single biggest piece of evidence against the whole invasion story. We're looking at the site of the Hyksos capital city, Avaris. Archaeologists have been digging here for decades. And if there was some brutal, fiery conquest, you'd expect to find certain things, right? Burn layers, signs of destruction, weapons everywhere, mass graves. But they found nothing, none of it, zero signs of a massive battle. The city wasn't conquered, it just grew.
So instead of this sudden, violent invasion, the evidence paints a totally different picture. A slow, gradual migration. For more than 150 years before any foreign dynasty took over, people from the Levant were peacefully settling in the Nile Delta. And this is so cool. Scientists did strontium isotope analysis on the skeletons found at Avaris, and they found that a lot of the immigrants were women. Now that is the telltale sign of families moving in and settling down over generations, not an army of warriors showing up to conquer.
And when people mix like this, it naturally leads to this beautiful blending of cultures. I mean, just feast your eyes on this diadem. It was found in a tomb at Avaris. The actual metalwork, the way it's made, is 100% Egyptian style. But the design, look at those delicate gazelles in that stag. That's pure Near Eastern art. This is not the kind of thing you see from a hostile takeover. This is the art of two cultures living together, influencing each other, and making something brand new.
Okay, so if it wasn't this violent conquest, what was Hyksos rule actually like? Well, it looks like they rose to power when Egypt was politically weak, and they ended up ruling over a kingdom that was basically split in two.
So,
Picture this. Egypt is divided. You've got the Hyksos kings ruling from their capital, Avaris, up in the north. But, and this is super important, down south in the city of Thebes, there's still a native Egyptian dynasty of pharaohs ruling. They're coexisting. And the Hyksos didn't just come in and try to tear everything down. No, they were smart. They took on Egyptian royal titles, they hired local Egyptian scribes and officials, and they kept the bureaucracy running, just while adding some of their own administrative ideas from back home. It was a real hybrid system of government.
Now, trying to figure out who these kings actually were, that's where it gets really tricky, and this chart really shows you the gaps in our knowledge. Manetho, the later historian, he gives us 6 names and says they ruled for a super long time. But the Turin king list, which is much older and more reliable, also lists 6 kings but gives them a much shorter reign of 108 years. And to top it off, we can only clearly read the very last name on that list. It's a genuine historical puzzle we're still trying to solve.
But of course, this period of coexistence couldn't last, and it did come to a violent end. But the war that started, it wasn't some grand rebellion by an oppressed people. The evidence suggests it was more of a calculated power play kicked off by that ambitious Egyptian dynasty down in Thebes. They wanted to reunify the country, but they wanted to do it under their rule.
And you can just feel the resentment and the ambition in these words from the Theban pharaoh, Ahmose. He's complaining about having to share Egypt with an Asiatic in the north and a Nubian in the south. So his goal wasn't just to get rid of foreigners, it was to take back total control over every inch of Egypt for himself.
And make no mistake, this was a brutal, bloody war. What you're looking at is the head of Ahmose's own father, Seqenenre-Ta. The horrific wounds you see were made by Asiatic-style axes. This is stark physical proof that he died a violent death, almost certainly in a battle against the Hyksos. This wasn't just a skirmish. This was an all-out war for the throne of Egypt.
Ultimately, the final victory went to Ahmose's successor, a pharaoh named Ahmose I. He's the one who successfully drove the Hyksos rulers out of Avaris, reunified the entire country, and by doing that, he kicked off what would become Egypt's most famous and glorious era, the New Kingdom. We're talking the age of King Tut and Ramses the Great.
But here's the thing, winning on the battlefield, that wasn't quite enough. To make sure their new dynasty was secure, the pharaohs of the New Kingdom had to win another war, the war for the history books.
And this is the moment where history gets rewritten. The new pharaohs, now in charge of everything, launched what we would absolutely call a massive propaganda campaign today. They had to justify their war, right? So they took what was basically a civil war over who should rule and reframed it as this heroic struggle to save the nation. All of a sudden, the Hyksos weren't just political rivals anymore. Now, they were evil, cruel, foreign invaders, and the Theban pharaohs, they were the saviors of all of Egypt.
And man, this new story was incredibly effective. For one, it justified the war the Thebans had started. It also gave the newly reunified Egypt a common enemy to rally against, which is always a powerful tool. And, crucially, this story became the official, state-sponsored history. It's the version that got carved into temples, the one that was passed down for generations. And yep, it's the version that the historian Manetho would eventually write down, cementing the Hyksos' reputation as villains for the next few thousand years.
So, the story of the Hyksos is just such a powerful reminder that history is, so often, written by the victors. It really makes you think, doesn't it? What stories from our own time are being shaped and spun right now? And when future historians or archaeologists dig up our world, whose version of our story will be the one they find?